Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So today I am back to talk about the books that I read in August. We are only doing one wrap up for August because honestly I didn't read that much. I feel like I was consistently reading, I just wasn't consistently finishing books. And in fact you'll be able to see there is a pile right behind me of all of the books that I'm currently reading. I seem to be in a very bad habit at the moment of like reading about 30 pages to 100 pages of a book and then just not finishing it. And it's not that I'm not enjoying the book, like I have full intentions of going back to it. I'm just not completing said book. Hopefully that is a habit that I can get out of quite quickly. But without much further ado, let's just get into the books. The first book that I finished in August was Crying in H-Mart by Michelle Zauner. This is non-fiction. It is a memoir of Michelle's experiences losing her mother to cancer. It's very much generally talking about her family life, her relationship to her mother, which was kind of contentious. You know, there was definitely a lot of love there, but she was a very strict mother. At points could get kind of a little bit verbally abusive. It's just a very complicated dynamic that I think a lot of people can relate to and understand. Loving somebody even though you don't always love everything that they do and you don't always love how they treat you. But also her feelings of loss in terms of her identity, because Michelle Zauner, she's half white, half Korean. And with the loss of her mother, growing up in America rather than in Korea, feeling like with the loss of her mother, she has lost this crucial part of her Korean identity. Her mother was what tied her to her Korean roots, especially through food. And there are lots of instances of her talking about food that she shared with her mother, the food itself, the practices around eating that food, and how it all reminds her of her mother. And also just generally is a memoir about how grief can sneak upon you. The title, Crying in H-Mart, kind of being reflective of that. Grief is not some kind of like one and done scenario where you go through an intense period of mourning and then you're fine. Like it just sneaks upon you and it can be triggered by just anything. I think you often hear a lot about like people missing their families over certain significant events, so around their birthdays, around the anniversary of their deaths, around Christmas time, but it really can be triggered by anything. And for her, because she has such a connection to her mother in terms of eating lots of Korean food, going into H-Mart will suddenly prompt her to just have a breakdown in the middle of the shopping aisle. And you know, that is grief. It's intense and doesn't always make sense. This was one that I was actually reading for my work book club, and I'm going to be really interested to seeing the conversation that happens around this. I think it is a really brilliant memoir. I just feel like there are going to be a lot of topics of conversation that we can really sink our teeth into with this book. Then next up, slightly different tact, I read the Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. This is a romance book all about Stella. Stella works in econometrics. She is very, very skilled at this job. She knows what she's doing. It's what she loves, but is frequently criticised by her family for not having much of a social life and not having really any of a love life. The main stumbling stone for Stella and her family as they see it is because of the fact that she has Asperger's. Stella is very regimented. She has certain things that she does and does not do, certain things that are triggers for her that make her very uncomfortable, ways in which she personally finds social interaction to be hard, but also I think also ways in which her family have told her that she is not good socially. And so dating for Stella seems a bit of a minefield. So at the beginning of the book we see Stella making a decision that she is going to pay for an escort to kind of teach her how to be in a relationship. She wants to learn how to be in a relationship, but she feels like she can't just voice that on to like some unsuspecting person. She needs a trained professional. Enter Michael, who every Friday night he works as a male escort in order, we find out, to raise money for his mother's medical bills. He meets Stella and he's fairly adamant that he doesn't do return clients, but is very quickly charmed by her and is surprised that she would even be requiring his services. There are instant sparks in the air. But both of these two have kind of things that they're keeping from each other. Michael doesn't know why Stella has been enlisting her services and she doesn't know why he works as an escort, and all of these things get revealed as we go, as they start to deepen their connection. And oh no, could client and employer be falling for each other? What's gonna happen? You know exactly what's gonna happen. This was a really sweet romance. The author herself actually has Asperger's, so was able to write about this main character in a way that felt like very true to life and very sensitively told. I felt like even though there were sometimes communication issues, these two characters did have a great chemistry, did bounce off each other really well. She's learning things from him and he's learning things from her, which is I think what you want from a teacher-mentor dynamic, is that they are both going to teach each other something. I thought it was really lovely. It probably isn't one of my favourite romances just because of the fact one of my main things that I want in any romance is for there to be really strong supporting characters, and whilst there are supporting characters in here, I felt like they were just a little bit half-baked. I always want supporting characters who seem to have their own personalities and their own things going on outside of the main couple. And I didn't always feel like I got a strong sense of any of these supporting characters. They're just kind of there, and you know, it's fine. It just means that it's not gonna like reach the upper echelons of romance books for me. But really sweet and really lovely. I'm glad that I've read this one. Next up, we've got non-fiction history. We have Femina, A New History of the Middle Ages Through the Women Written Out of It by Janina Ramirez. This is a new history, as we say, about medieval women, which is one that I know a lot of people have been anticipating, and I really enjoyed this. This is a fantastic read, definitely one that I think everybody should pick up. Talking about medieval women, though, what I will say about this is a lot more case studies than it is a general overview of women's experiences, and I do understand that, because obviously the women that we have a lot of source archival information for are usually going to be more prominent women, or women for whom there would naturally be more archival evidence for. I feel like your regular peasant woman isn't going to get much page coverage. You're lucky to know that she exists, but royalty, nobility, and nuns will probably be a little bit easier to identify and to track the lives of. We're talking about a very long period of time, and a time period in which, like, we don't even have the birth dates for queens, because royal women, as opposed to royal men, were not deemed important enough to write down when they were born. That's what we're dealing with here. And this really kind of builds up a context for the time period whilst also scattering in these case studies of these women. I think it's really engaging. I think the history is really sound. Yeah, if women in history is your thing, then definitely check this out. I think it's really good. One that I'm not going to talk about too much, because I have a feeling I'll probably want to talk about this entire series in more detail, is the second book in the Six Tudor Queens series by Alison Weir. So we are focusing on Anne Boleyn, and the subtitle is A King's Obsession. I actually don't think I previously talked about when I read Catherine of Aragon. I think that was in a time period that I just didn't do a wrap up for. But I've been really pleasantly surprised by this series. I wasn't really sure what to expect going into this. I had read one other Alison Weir fiction book in the past, which was The Marriage Game, which was all about Elizabeth I and her romantic relationships. And whilst I enjoyed it, you know, I enjoyed my time with that book. It felt definitely like non-fiction, but with speech thrown in. It felt very much like this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And that was what I was kind of worried about with this series. Was it was just going to be a lot of this, and not a lot of time to kind of flesh out personalities. However, so far so good. I feel like Alison Weir definitely flits through the history very quickly, but I think there is enough reflective time in these books, and I am just enjoying being in Alison's recreation of the Tudor courts. I was actually a little bit nervous going into this, because from what I have heard, Alison Weir is not really a big fan of Anne Boleyn. She is much more of a Catherine of Aragon supporter, and that definitely came through in the Catherine of Aragon book. And I feel like I could kind of see remnants of that, maybe not dislike, but kind of just antipathy towards Anne, in the fact that her portrayal of Anne Boleyn is definitely like she does not have any love for Henry. She's definitely just kind of manipulating the situation. There is no point in here where she shows any sort of affection towards him. You know, she is just playing the game. Whereas I always like to see my Anne Boleyns with a little bit more balance than that. I think definitely Henry was more infatuated than Anne was, but I always like there to be like a bit of mutual passion there. I think that just makes for a slightly more interesting story. And I think because of that, I ended up enjoying the first section of this where it's Anne growing up and it's her being in the French court. I found that slightly more interesting, just seeing her just develop into this very smart, very charming, witty woman. Certain things that are played up, such as her relationship to Henry Norris, that is depicted as the big love of her life. Also, something that is worth bearing in mind with this one is that there is a lot of discussion of sexual assault and rape, particularly as it pertains to certain characters in this book, and how these acts of sexual violence motivate characters to do the things that they do. I think with this, like with any sort of Tudor depiction, I feel like you can't write historical fiction without taking some sort of angle, and you just have to go along with that depiction. And you may not always agree with the choices that are being made, but for the sake of like internal logic, internal consistency, you have to just go with it. And yeah, I enjoyed my time here. It's not Anne as I personally see her, but it is interesting to look at her from Alison Weir's perspective, and it wasn't as like wholly bad as I thought it was going to be. Then the last book I have to talk about is Truth of the Divine by Lindsay Ellis, which is the sequel to Axiom's End, which released in 2020. It's been a long time coming, me actually picking this one up. I got it when it was originally published and have just waited until now. So as I say, this is the sequel to Axiom's End, which is a first contact book. It is set in an alternative 2007-2008, in which it has been leaked to the public that the US government has had first contact with an alien life form. We don't don't know anything about them, but the cover-up has obviously caused a lot of scandal. Our main character, Cora Sabino, is tied up in this because her father, who she is estranged from, was actually the whistleblower who revealed this scandal. And Cora's kind of trying to keep her head down, she's trying to go along with her life, but the US government end up confronting her family, and in the kind of skirmish, Cora is running away, and she ends up being kidnapped by one of these aliens, who injects her with a device which means that she can now communicate and understand their language, and they can understand her. And so she very quickly becomes an intermediary between the Earth population and the aliens, and she develops a really strong relationship with one of these aliens, Ampersand. There are a lot of traumatic events and intrigue that go along in the last section of the first book, and this book basically picks up where we left off, where Cora is really reeling from this experience. One of the main themes of this book is mental health and post-traumatic stress disorder, and how people do respond to these big traumatic events. And we see that Cora is really not dealing with this and is really struggling to recover. And I think that is a big noticeable thing about this book, is that it is a lot less plotty. Whilst big events do happen, a lot more of the narrative is spent to focusing on Cora's mental health. And she's also a bit more of a backseat presence in this book. We are introduced to a second point of view character, Kava Mazandarani, who is a journalist who has been publishing articles about this presence, who ends up bumping into Cora, and their relationship goes from there. And the perspectives kind of split down the middle between Cora and Kava. For me personally, I like a slightly more reflective, slow-paced book that is focusing on like characters and their personalities and how events are affecting them and their relationships to others. I love that. But if you are somebody who is more into your plot, then this might be a little bit of a disappointment to you. I will say, however, the ending to this kind of left me speechless. I was not expecting where this book ended up going, and I cannot say anything without spoiling things, but it just made me go, what? And actually a little bit sad, I'm not gonna lie to you. But I'm interested to see where the book goes from there. Also, whilst there are more aliens in terms of numbers in this book, there's also less of them because we are focusing very much on Cora and Kave, which I think might irritate some people who have definitely been coming to this book for the aliens. As I said in the past, I'm not a massive sci-fi person. The reason that I'm reading this is because I really like Lindsay Ellis as a creator, so I wanted to support her books. And so I'm gonna read them because I really like her writing. I will also say that I think her writing has definitely improved. I think there are still like certain phrases that she often comes back to that I recognise from the first book. So for example, there are less instances of her saying that a character all but did an action, but they were definitely in this book and I did notice them. But I feel like she's gotten the voices of these characters and made them a little bit more unique and distinctive. These characters have a lot of snock to them and a lot of personality, and there are a lot of pop culture references. If you are not a fan of a pop culture reference, then you're probably not going to enjoy this series because it is all over the place in here. And it was one of those instances where I'm like, is it always a good thing to know a lot about an author before you read their book? Because there were so many instances where I was just like, ah, classic Lindsay. Of course she would throw that reference in there because I have watched her videos and I know where she would have gotten certain jokes from. But it is a thing where it's an in-joke if you know her as a writer and as a video content creator. But if you were reading this, you would just think, oh, that's a random pop cultural reference. I did also notice in this that there were a few instances of like slang being used in here that seemed very like 2021. It seemed a lot more current, and the main reason that I pick up on that is because I remember for the first book, Lindsay talking about how she was constantly checking in to see if certain slang was current slang or if it was something that was used in 2007, and that she had to delete a lot of phrases and a lot of slang that just wouldn't have been used then. So the fact that there were certain bits and pieces that I felt like, I don't remember people saying that in 2007. Obviously it's been a while and I was like 12, so maybe I don't remember everything. But there were just certain things where I was like, huh, I don't think that I feel like that's something that is more recent. So that's a slight inconsistency that I had, but it didn't mean that I didn't enjoy it. I had a good time with this. You know, for somebody who doesn't read sci-fi, I was able to follow this fairly well, and I'll definitely be reading the next one because I'm just like, where do we go from here? I'm intrigued. What's gonna happen? So there we go. Those are all the books that I read in the month of August. Do let me know if you've read any of the books that I've spoken about today. Alternatively, let me know about anything that you've read recently that you think I might enjoy, or that just you yourself have enjoyed. I'd love to hear from you either way. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks.